So the way I see it is this. It's not a matter of whether or not the yarn is good. It's Red Heart. Whatever your personal opinion of Red Heart is, you've already made up your mind. It's not even really a question as to whether it makes a granny square, because Red Heart makes at least one really popular planned pooling yarn. The question is this: is Red Heart all-in-one granny square worth dragging your spouse through Walmart on a Saturday? Now, it doesn't have to be your spouse. It could be a sibling, a parent, or a friend you yarn shop with. Whoever they are, they remember when your sister-in-law found out you'd taken up yarn crafting and sent a book full of knitting and crochet fails, some of which originated in the 1970s and invariably included the use of squeaky plastic acrylic granny squares. They'll then remind you that once upon a time, when you were a know-it-all knitting yarn snob, likely high on merino fumes, you swore you'd never make anything so tacky as a granny square. They'll continue to remind you that you've been sneaking the occasional granny square into your projects, maybe hoping they hadn't noticed. Newsflash, they noticed. So what you have to do is ask yourself this: does this yarn do what it says on the label, and is that enough to risk the raised eyebrow of your beloved bestie when, since Michael's doesn't seem to carry Red Heart any longer and Joanne's doesn't have a convenient storefront in Canada for impulse shopping, you ask if you can stop in at that bastion of capitalist consumption, Walmart? Well, let's find out. You might say that I dragged the husbeast into two separate Walmarts in search of this yarn. The alternate explanation is I went into Walmart and he accompanied me. Seriously, he could have stayed in the car, but he was having far too much fun amusing himself at my expense. No footage from inside Walmart, unfortunately. We found a couple of skeins at the first Walmart on Saturday and 0 at the second on Sunday evening. I have no interest in trying yet another local Walmart to see if they have any. Remember the days when there was one Walmart in your area and you had to make a concerted effort to go there? How is it that there are 4 within a half hour or less drive from my home? Now, concerning the yarn, is this a limited run, or is it something Red Heart is just testing on the market? Because the few balls we found were tucked away on the bottom shelf of an end cap, and when you look at the Yarnspirations website, most of the color choices are sold out. There are 3 main color themes for this collection: soft white, black, and Aran. Basically, they correlate to the last color in the 5-color repeating pattern. There were maybe 1 or 2 of the Aran skeins, but the rest of the available yarn were all soft white. So while I would have liked the black hyperviolet or carnation code, I came home with pink punch and amethyst. The skeins are definitely chunky boys. They're 8.8 ounces or 250 grams each, and that's about 110 grams more than the Super Saver planned pooling neon stripes yarn I've been playing around with. The Granny Square yarn has 381 meters or 417 yards. In comparison, the Super Saver is 236 meters or 215 yards. For those of you wanting the breakdown, the Red Heart all-in-one Granny Square has greater than 100 meters or 200 yards more length. So you'll definitely have a lot of yarn to play with. You'll also pay more for it. My Super Saver was about $5 per ball. The Granny Square yarn was about $12 after tax. The Canadian Yarnspirations website quotes their price at around $12.49, so you're getting maybe double the amount of yarn for double the price. Each ball apparently makes up to 14 Granny Squares, and to get the desired effect, you need to follow Red Heart's pattern, conveniently printed on the ball band. Much like their planned pooling yarn, they give you a suggested hook size and expect you to vary your tension, stitch size, or hook size to accommodate the precisely measured color segments of yarn to get the desired effect. The one upshot to navigating these hoops is that you can make a granny square with 5 colors without having to weave in any ends. Red Heart claims the system is beginner-friendly and cuts down on the amount of yarn you need to lug around. So, shall we see if they're correct? I'm not exactly a novice crocheter, but I'm not cranking out granny squares left, right, and center. I'm an enthusiastic and curious bystander with a sick fascination for novelty craft gimmicks, apparently. Alright, so let's go over the pros and cons. You don't have to lug around multiple balls of yarn to make a single granny square. However, if the 14 or so granny squares you can make with one ball of all-in-one granny squares is not enough, you'll probably be lugging around multiple balls of all-in-one granny squares. Remember, a ball of all-in-one granny squares is roughly twice the size of a ball of Super Saver, so if you need 8 balls of Super Saver to crochet a blanket, you'll possibly need 4 or 5 balls of all-in-one granny squares. If you can find 4 or 5 balls, and if you can find them in the color pattern or patterns you're looking for. It is, at its most basic, a planned pooling crochet project, so it's relatively easy as long as you can get gauge. This may mean tightening or loosening your tension, either by crocheting tighter or looser, or by changing the gauge of your hook. So I'd recommend having at least 3 hooks, one of the recommended size, one smaller, and one size larger. So if you were hoping to lug just one ball of yarn and a single hook, prepare a project bag to carry your stuff. Granny squares are strangely popular right now, and the projects you can make with this yarn are wonderfully modular. You can use granny squares to make blankets, sweaters, apparently even pants. And you're going to need at least one extra ball of yarn to stitch all your granny squares together. It might be all in one, but that doesn't include joining your granny squares into whatever final form you choose. So if you don't have a ball of white or black or whatever they're classifying RN as to match the final round of the granny square, you'll likely have to do another round of stitching with whatever yarn you choose to stitch the squares together. Because all the colors are pre-measured for you, you don't wind up with partial balls of leftover yarn once you've finished the project. Plus, you don't have to stop and think about what color comes next or weave in the ends. However, it means every granny square is the same, and if you're slightly attention deficit, you may find diversity in your granny squares is what gets you through making multiples. As a person who loves self-striping sock yarn for precisely that reason, the static color pattern might cause more project abandonment. I've started a few crocheted blanket projects, and the only one that even remotely still holds my interest is the planned pooling pseudo argyle I'm making out of Red Heart Super Saver neon stripes. The way the colors change amuses me, and seeing the pattern emerging from the rows of stitches is fantastic. It keeps me from dwelling on the fact that every row is, in essence, the same. I just don't work on it much because kittens. Destructive little beasts. But where I'm going with this is, you may find weaving in the ends is just one of the things you need to put up with in order to enjoy making granny squares if you find you need to switch up your colors to keep your interest long enough to contemplate a project like a blanket or a sweater. The other pro to changing your colors and weaving in ends is that you don't have to futz about with your gauge. As I mentioned before, you might have to crochet looser or tighter to finish your round without coming up short or having too much of the color left over. So when you switch colors manually, you don't have that concern. The same could probably be said for standard planned pooling patterns. It would be easier to join another color for 8 granny clusters than to constantly rip back and recrochet with a larger or smaller hook or tension. But for the most part, once you get into a groove, you really don't mind as much. With a granny square where you're having to turn corners, I'm not sure I'd have the patience for all that ripping back and recrocheting. I suspect in the time you're futzing to get the round perfect, you could weave in and or trim all those ends. I guess time will tell on that account. Okay, so having had a chance to play with the yarn and see how it works, here are my thoughts and my answer to the overarching question of whether you should be so excited for this yarn that you drag your shopping partner into Walmart to get it. It's Red Heart. You're not getting anything newer or softer or cooler than ye old Super Saver. It's more expensive, so you'd probably want to think about what you want to make with all those granny squares. I'll probably do another round in black, or substitute the round of white for black and stitch them together as a blanket, alternating the 2 color patterns, if I keep up with it. I didn't have a lot of trouble getting started. The first full round of hot pink was rather frustrating, having to rip out practically the whole round multiple times and finally having to go up a hook size. Things evened off a bit afterward. Some ripping back, but not enough to be truly annoying. I ripped back the final round and just recrocheted it with the lower hook size. The size of the granny square is in the general vicinity of the gauge the pattern says you should get. When I was working and reworking the second round, I had the distinct feeling that I would have been much further along if I was switching balls of yarn and just weaving in ends, or just sticking with one color per square. I didn't really get bored with the color pattern. If anything, I rolled my eyes a lot at coming up short or having too much left over of whatever color I was on. I figure that if I start getting bored with the colors, I'll switch to the other skein of yarn for a bit. If anything, making the one granny square was a way to kill an hour. I'm sure that if I'd been camped out on the sofa or in front of my computer with YouTube or my current rewatch of the Christopher Eccleston era Doctor Who, I'd probably be very amused. Possibly highly amused. So do I think you should drag your shopping partner into Walmart for this yarn? Nah. If you happen to be there or in any other store that sells Red Heart products, sure, pick it up. If you enjoy Red Heart and granny squares, have a passing interest in planned pooling and lots of patience, you'll probably enjoy this yarn. But don't go out of your way if you aren't sure you're going to find it. There's no need to deal with screaming kids and people moving like they're rolling on some tabletop RPG's random movement table just to get this yarn. If you need to, find a place online that sells it, or have a friend or two keep their eyes open if they're going shopping. But that's just my opinion. If you think it was useful, please do boop the like button, and if you're not already subscribed to the channel, well, I hear the subscribe button now has some funky animations if you click it too. I'm just your basic dabbler in crafting and time travel. You never know what you'll get around here. There may be tatting coming soon. Extra special thanks to my patrons. It's thanks to you folks that I can afford to pick up a couple of balls of wacky acrylic for testing purposes. Cheers.